when I work with a client, like I try and like dive into their business, right? If they're local, I try and eat at their restaurant, try and talk to people about their restaurants, and act as if the outcome of their or the success of their restaurant is now my responsibility. It's not just about setting up their data; it's about kind of making sure that I'm supporting them in all elements.
Hi and welcome to Hospitality Huddles. I'm Scot Turner and each episode we'll be uncovering the industry's biggest challenges and serving up the solutions to help overcome them. We're bringing together some of the best thought leaders in the industry and finding some of the most creative minds shaping the future of hospitality from all around the world. They're going to share insights tackling the pain points operators just like you face every day. Hospitality Huddles is more than a podcast, it's a community of passionate individuals who appreciate the art and science of hospitality and want to help answer the difficult questions. If you like the show, one of the best ways to support us is to hit that subscribe button and leave a review. It's only going to take a couple of minutes and it really does make the difference. So let's get on with today's episode, and all that's left to say is welcome to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation, one huddle at a time. So Derek, good to have you here. We're going to talk a lot about data and I'm really excited for this chat today. So we always ask people to tell the audience who they are and what they do and what they're passionate about. So if we can start with that, and then we'll start going on to some more interesting subjects after there to do with data.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. My name's Derek Smith. I am the founder of Canopy Metrics, and what I do is help businesses, primarily restaurants, use their data more effectively to make more money. When you're asking about what I'm passionate about data, passionate about how to utilize data more effectively, and yeah, that includes building big spreadsheets and making interesting charts and visualizations. So that's what I do.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot, don't we, in terms of how to make dashboards really easy to understand. And it's one question I want to ask you later. But when we always do individual chats with people, we always ask the first question is, what does hospitality mean to you? So over to you on this one as well.
I love that question. I always want to answer that from the angle of like how it's utilized within restaurants, but I think hospitality is a lot bigger than that. Hospitality to me is about the process of ensuring that guests, whether it's in your home, if it's at a hockey game or you're out meeting somebody for a coffee, like that you're helping them experience whatever situation you're in the most positive way you can. I think hospitality transcends just businesses. Those of us who have grown up in the industry and been servers or worked in the kitchens. I think that we tend to use hospitality in every facet of our life, right? And I know that kind of sounds maybe a little bit of a hyperbole, but that's how I approach it, right? When somebody comes over, I try and give them the best experience I can, just like I did when I was a server.
Yeah, it's a really good answer. And I was always told that hospitality is all about creating memorable experiences, right? And it's back to exactly what you said. It's whenever you welcome someone to your home, into your restaurant, wherever you might do, it comes back to creating great memories for people, doesn't it? So I really love that answer. Now, when I wanted to chat to you, and we talk a lot already anyway, so we know each other well. Lots of people are talking about data right now in the industry, and it seems like we're starting to finally catch on that we've got this stuff sitting there in our EPOS systems and our back office systems that can actually help us quite a bit. And I guess let's talk about that quickly, because I want to spend time talking about the future and where we can take it after that. So how important is data for restaurants, and why do so many people not utilize it effectively?
Yeah, it's a good two-part question. To the first part, why is data important? I think the easiest way to answer that question is by looking at other industries, right? So when you look at the healthcare industry, for instance, when you go to a doctor's office, the doctor has two choices, right? He or she can, diagnose you based on what they think is happening, right? So you say, hey, I've got, this list of symptoms, and they say, okay, well, I think it's this, right? And so they're going to use their best judgment, and I think that's where we kind of sit as a restaurant industry, and we have for a very long time, right? Is we diagnose problems within our restaurants through experience, and that's good. And there's always going to be a place for that. Um, what I think data can help restaurants do, much like the healthcare industry, is to be able to allow owners and operators to diagnose problems with like, objective fact, right? So it takes the guesswork out of the diagnosis of problems, or when you're trying to set up a new promotion, you can use data to ensure that that promotion has the highest effectiveness, right? It prevents you from wasting a bunch of money. So I think the objectivity of data and the use of data helps make operations more efficient, and also helps make promotional activity much more effective. To point two about why it's so difficult and maybe not adopted at the same rate as other industries. Um, you know, data in the restaurant space is difficult for many reasons. First of all, there's just so much of it, right? So if you look at how much data is being produced by a POS system, then you've got your food cost management system, you've got your labor systems. Like there's literally millions of points of data. So I think for a lot of restaurant owners, when they start to look into their information, unless they have a plan of attack, they're just going to get lost. And we call that analysis paralysis, right? It's just like there's just too much stuff to look at. So I'm just not going to look at any of it. I think the second part to that is that for the most part, the data sits in silos. So it's really hard to actually be able to compare, let's say, labor data to your POS data, right? So your food cost data will sit in this silo, labor data will sit in that silo, your transaction data will sit in that silo, and to bring it together takes a lot of work, and that's where I spend a lot of my time, is bringing that information together. But it doesn't need to be that way, and I think there's some new tools coming out that are helping in that regard.
Yeah, and you touched on it earlier about dashboards and making data simple, and um, I advocate a lot for Tenzo. We both know Christian at Tenzo, and I know him very well, because what that did for our business when we were managing 80 odd locations across different countries was it brought data into one place from each individual system in the spider diagram, and it brought all the data in and it put it in graphs, and it made it super easy for the teams to look at data and understand when a peak went up and a peak went down, and understanding that things were happening with whatever metric it was. So how important is getting data into dashboards that are easy to read for getting the success out of it?
I think it's vitally important. Tenzo is a great example, right? It's a business that has centered themselves around integrating data from multiple different sources, and putting it into one spot, and then within that one spot, they're starting to correlate data, which I think is where the most amount of value lies, right? Just being able to see data is important. That descriptive element of data, being able to kind of look at it in a more sort of summarized or aggregated way, is really important. But when you can start to blend, let's say, labor hours utilized, on the same graph as number of covers within the restaurant, that's where you start to get some really big value. Same, on the food cost side, right? If you're able to blend sales mix percentage with food cost percentage, you can start to see correlations between potentially higher food cost variance with respect to a certain sales mix, right? And that can help with menu engineering. So as soon as you start to blend that information together, it starts to become extremely powerful. And I think that's where a tool like Tenzo is very, very helpful. Tenzo is one of the only ones I know in the game that is doing it to that scale. And then you've obviously got businesses like Restaurant 365 that can provide that across multiple different areas of the business as well. So I think that, to me, is going to be the direction for a lot of. That's what I would recommend for a lot of restaurants moving forward.
Yeah, and I guess that then brings us to probably the main phrase that we hear quite a lot with data, isn't it? And that's garbage in, garbage out, and the phrase clean data. How important is that to being able to understand data properly, because it is a big issue, isn't it? When certainly in operations, I go and see understanding whether that data is clean or not first is really important before making decisions. Because if you make decision on a wrong fact, then it's obviously taking you down the wrong route as well.
It's vitally important. If you look at some of the restaurant groups in the States, for instance, that have 500 restaurants, generally when you get to that size, we call it data governance, which sounds like a big sort of fancy term, but really it's about, how are you going to configure your data so that it's similar across your entire business. And data governance is extremely important as you grow. The restaurants that are at the sort of 500 unit capacity, if they didn't have proper data governance, there's no way that they could scale their business properly. And one example of that is when you open a new store or a new restaurant and you want to be able to duplicate a menu at that new restaurant. If you have proper data governance, then everything is just copy and paste. It's extremely simple. So the technological elements of your business, the configuration settings and all of that, that doesn't need to, it's not going to require hundreds of hours of work to get that reset up. You have to put in your new employee names and their job codes and their pay rates. That's going to be about it. If the menu's the same, you can just copy and paste. And I think that's the value of proper data governance and proper configuration. With a lot of clients, when I start working with them, that's usually the place that we start, is to go through each of their systems and to see what their data looks like and clean it up where necessary. Where I see this, really affecting clients is on the food cost side. Because what happens is they have an integration between their POS system and their food cost management system, but their POS system contains a whole bunch of items that are no longer being sold. While on their food costs, with their food cost management system, you need to basically have you know a connection between the two systems, right? So the food cost management system saying, "Hey, I still got this item here. What's the recipe for it? How do I manage it?" And it can be a big nightmare. And what happens for a lot of restaurants, they say, "This is too hard to manage. I'm out." Right? So I think
Yeah.
it's really important to make sure that you're managing that data properly and maintaining it. Just like your car, take it in for an oil change, a regular oil change, and it's going to run just fine for you.
Yeah, that was always one of the reports that I used to look at first as well on the inventory system, was that one where you start looking at the PLU links and making sure that everything is actually linked to a button on the till and that no revenue is getting lost in the system somewhere. And we've spoke before, haven't we, about actual versus theoretical, and it's so important to make sure that all the data's feeding in. And when we talk about the phrase clean data, I guess we're pretty au fait with what that means. But if someone's listening to this and doesn't understand what clean data means, or whether they have clean data in their business, how do they go about understanding if that's in place already?
Ooh, that's a good question. Hmm. I think that let's take the POS information as a good example here, right? So if you went into your POS settings and you compare the items that you have within your POS system to the items that are active on your menu, right? And you put those two lists side by side. What you're going to find if you have data that is not clean is going to be a whole bunch of items on there that are not actually being sold. They're not on any of your POS screens. It's just dormant data that's just clouding up, your system, right? So that's an example, like a really quick example, I guess, of data that might not be clean. Another example is like, actually, this is probably a better example. If you have two restaurants, it's the same concept, but when you look at the way that their items are being, um, grouped when it comes to like menu categories, restaurant A has a certain item in a different or a menu category than restaurant B. That's a big problem because when you try and summarize that data, in an aggregated report across the whole business, it's going to just throw up errors all over the place because you might have spaghetti in the entree section in this restaurant, but then in the pasta section of this restaurant, right? So I know you were asking me what's a way to find clean data. It's probably easier to tell you a way to find dirty data, right? When it's just like not comparable, and you could just look at it and say this does not make sense. And another really quick example, Scott, is on the labor cost side. You go into your labor system. I see this all the time. Is that when the general manager has the task of setting up the job codes in a restaurant, and that job is at store level, what will happen is, a general manager at store A might type in server, general manager at store B might type in service, and then when you try and compile that information at the end of the day, those are considered to be two different job codes, and again, it throws up errors all over the place. So it's
Yeah.
always best to try and centralize the configuration activity for a restaurant group that is over one or two restaurants, in my opinion.
Yeah, we it's one of the big things that we always used to do as well is locking down that back office and not letting people into it is super key, isn't it, in terms of being able to keep things clean? Because naturally, people will go in and they'll put buttons on a busy night. The chef will run a special. It'll go in the wrong way. It might not be coded properly. It might go to beverage instead of food. It's all examples, isn't it? And there was an example I've got very similar to that is we were looking at through reservation system. 7 rooms is what we used with one of our clients, and we were going through and we found out that there was one hostess who kept putting all the guests in as walk-in, and wasn't adding guest names and profiles, so we weren't building up the profiles. So then when we started looking at data, it was really hard to track kind of properly what was happening in the restaurant, because we had this large proportion of walk-in, of guest called walk-in, that had sat in the restaurant, and all the stuff that was coming over from Micros in terms of the guest checks and things was all getting lost. People were leaving reviews, and we couldn't then match it to the profile. So from a guest retention perspective, and then talking to those people afterwards, we just found a massive gap because we had this huge kind of amount of covers in the system that was sat there as walking essentially, and nothing was assigned to them. So I think it can really transcend into wherever you aren't seeing data that's usable. It's probably a surefire way that it's not clean, because if you can't use it and you can't make decisions from it, then it's kind of pointless being there in the first place, isn't it? It's really important from that perspective.
And it'll save you so much time. That was a great example that you use, and it just reminds me of how a few different groups that I've been working with, they've been having troubles trying to get their information into their accounting systems, because when they are running cross checks between what their accounting system is showing and what their POS system is showing, they're not getting proper sort of validation, right? And part of that is because of the big movement towards DoorDash or Uber Eats, right? And how to code those properly in the system. So that's part of the goal, is to help them sort of configure that properly so that it shows up the correct way for them. It'll save you tons of
Yeah.
time if you can do it
And
right.
resource
Yeah.
and that daily reconciliation is crucial, isn't it? Every day we look at it versus we're in a hotel at the minute. We get the EPOS system, we get the reservation system, and we get what goes through to their front office system that then feeds into their accounts. And we go, is the revenue matching? Are the covers matching? And if there isn't, why? Because
Mhm.
something isn't right. It could be user error. It might be a coding error, but there's something. If all your systems aren't matching, there's something wrong there, isn't there, as well? So it's
Mhm.
really important. Now, I think when we came on and we spoke before we hit record on the episode, we said about kind of not going through the standard questions of asking about data and what metrics are you using and things like that. There's lots of examples out there. You've just done a great podcast with Andy Jones, who we both know on the same thing as well. So check that out if you want to know about metrics. What I want to talk about and get into conversation with you about is about where is data going, because AI is becoming more prominent. Things are being automated a lot more, and we know the restaurant industry is sitting behind the times to an extent, but it does seem to be starting to move forward now with some of these great systems coming on the market. So, where are we going in the future? What's going to happen with data? And I'd love to kind of just get into a great conversation with you about the possibilities that we can see in restaurants, hotels, hospitality, about using it moving forwards as well.
Yeah, this is such a fun topic. I'm really excited to talk about it. It's something that I sort of geek out with anybody else that's on the data side. I think you and I have chatted about this briefly before, but maybe I'll answer your question by talking about where I'd like to see the industry going. I can almost guarantee you, I hope this doesn't come back to bite me in the butt in 5 years, but I would say within the next 5 years, what you're going to see in the industry are automated analysis or automated reporting that essentially can replace, what it is that I do as a data analyst, right? Where um, you'll have a system that, no matter what restaurant software you're using, you could be using Margin Edge for your food cost inventory. You could be using Seven Shifts. You could be using Toast as your POS. Doesn't matter what you're using. Much like how Tenzo sort of integrates all that data together, I think what you'll see is a system that will help you integrate that data and then provide you with a report that will tell you, the key findings from your data and the best methods forward, to improve your business. So I'll give you a brief example. I'm a general manager of a restaurant, and on Monday morning, I received an email from the automated reporting service, and it says, "Hey, based on like this last week, this was your covers, this was your revenue, average check, all of the key indicators that we're used to looking at." But then it'll tell you at the bottom, based on this, we can see that this will, help you do this, will help you do that, right? We call that prescriptive analytics, much like what a doctor again does in the healthcare industry, right? As they say, based on your symptoms, we think that if we give you this, then it'll help you solve that. And I think that's going to be the way, it needs to be the way forward for our industry. The biggest reason why we need something like that is because restaurants are primarily made up of, mom and pop shops in the US, right? It's like, one, two, maybe three unit restaurants. They just simply don't have the capacity to hire an analyst internally. It's just not something that they could afford to do, right? So, if you want to be able to provide that sort of prescriptive analysis for those types of restaurants, it needs to be available in some sort of subscription based model, maybe $100 a month or something like that. But for $100 a month, you're going to get a fully automated report that's going to tell you sort of your marching orders for the week. And I know for the individuals that have been in the industry for a really long time, that might just sound totally ludicrous and not something that the industry should be about. But that's not to say that automated reports ever going to replace the fundamentals of the restaurant industry, which it includes customer service and great food. Right? It's just going to be another tool in the toolbox.
You've ended on a brilliant one there, and this is what I always say to operators about data and using tech and digitizing what they're doing is fundamentally it still needs someone to go and implement what the data is telling you. So if I pull a sales mix with my team now and I look through it and there's, we're doing it right now at the minute with a client that I'm working with, we're analyzing the sales mix and we're going, how can we make some more cash on some of the selling prices? Can we add anything to it? What's the data telling us? Fundamentally, we've now got a follow-up meeting on Monday with the chef where we're going to go, let's do X, Y, Z, and let's implement it into the business. That still is always going to need a human, isn't it? So it's really about understanding that data enables you to get better results quicker and make the right results based on a data set that isn't just a snapshot of opinions or what you might do. Because how many times have you gone into a business and you'll have a conversation, what's working well on the new menu, and the waitress will go, oh, it's the steak, they sell loads of the steak, and it's just because maybe they sold loads last night and it's fresh in the memory. But when you go and look at the sales mix, it's not actually the one that sells the most, right? So I think that's one of the key points that I always like to say to people is it's an enabler, it isn't the implementer.
It's really, really, it's such an important point that you bring up, right? Is that, um, data. So I always look at it like this, right? To be able to find a general manager or chef that is highly data centric and understands the financials entirely, and is able to, execute in the best way possible from like a customer service standpoint, like that's amazing. If you can find that, that's amazing, right? What I've seen is that um, in a lot of cases, you'll have someone who is extremely good, like the best at customer service, right? And you want them to be, best at customer service, best at leadership, best at all the things that you really like, the core fundamentals of our industry, right? And they're just like such an effective general manager. But then when it comes to metrics, performance measurement, and financial literacy, maybe that's the one area of the business that they could use some help, right? So if we're able to provide them with a tool that can summarize their performance and then give them sort of actionable tasks based on analysis, which is totally achievable in today's world, right? This is not some sort of like futuristic idea. This is achievable today. Um, that to me is where the power lies, right? Because then we can really have those very strong general managers and chefs that are really good at what they are, what they've come into the industry to do, which is just ensure that people leave with a positive experience. But then they have that additional sort of financial component that can help them drive a profitable business.
And how much is the current landscape for restaurants playing an impact into how important data is becoming? Because certainly from if I think back to when I was a waiter and coming up as a manager GM of restaurants, there was probably never as much focus on revenue or as much pressure on profitability, probably is the better phrase, than there is today. So do you think that the fact that we have to deliver great service, but actually now there's much more pressure to convert on the bottom line is actually meaning that people are being forced to look into data? Is that a fair assumption from what you see with your clients? Because I get it definitely feels like that from my side.
I think so in a big way. And I think the reason for that is multi pronged, right? I think what happened during the pandemic is, it threw a lot of businesses sort of profitability, all over the place. Obviously, when you're not making any revenue for, a long period of time, right, that's going to have an impact on your business. But then on the other side of the pandemic, when we came out of it, I think a lot of people were expecting that there was going to be this huge influx of covers back into their business. What I've seen with a lot of the groups that I work with is that COVID had a huge impact on the number of people that are going into cities to work. Right, there's a lot of remote workers now, and that's throwing a big wrench into especially like restaurants in downtown cores of cities where they just don't have the lunch business that they had before. Right, and you take away their lunch business, now you're removing like $3,000 of revenue from their business, right? And it's throwing their profit model just like totally out of whack. And in order to subsidize that, what's the one thing that we know how to do best in restaurants, right? It's like, oh, we have this problem. Let's raise our prices. And when we raise our prices, it's going to give us some additional profit. And there we go. We've subsidized our problem. We've done that for a long time, and it's always kind of been a thing that helps. I've worked with groups that were very good at raising prices, and that price increase was accepted by the clients, and that's just the way, or by the guests of the restaurant, and that's just the way it was. But I don't think we can do that anymore. I think when I said it was multi-pronged, you've got this declining covers coupled with an economy that's just going crazy right now, right? Like in Vancouver, where I live, the mortgage rates right now are ridiculous. In some cases, it's twice as high as it was 5 years ago. And so people just don't have the disposable income that they had before, and they're making a lot smarter choices when it comes to how to spend their money. So when we're increasing price, because that's all we know how to do, that's having a big impact on demand as well, and having a negative influence on covers, right? So I guess my thing is just how can we help maintain the profit dollar value that we've always had, or increase that profit dollar amount, by using additional elements of the income statement, right? Like labor efficiency or food cost management, that sort of thing.
Mm. Yeah, it's a really good point. The other thing, and I'd be interested to see what you think on this as well, is one thing that I think has happened since COVID, and we're exactly the same here in the UK, and it's definitely the same in Europe and some of the clients that I work with as well, is that kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday crowd in central cities. What I've found is that it's made it much more difficult for smaller restaurants to make ends meet. because they're not able to turn the tables quick enough because of volume, essentially, to be able to maximize those 3 days in the middle of the week when everyone's there. So the big restaurants that can get big covers in there, turntables have continued to do quite well because they can maximize the peak of people. The smaller restaurants have found it much more difficult, and then it becomes much more about yielding time people spend at the table, when you let people in, how do you set the shift up for people to sit. I'm not sure if you've seen the same, but it's definitely something that I've noticed with clients that I've been working with.
Yeah, no, I haven't noticed it. I'm sure it's happening, across North America as well. The idea of like demand management. I love how we can manage demand more effectively to be able to spread that demand out over a certain number of hours. I mean, we've been doing this for decades in the restaurant business, but I think that there's an interesting way to utilize information more effectively now. You look at the host stands. A lot of host stands now are using digital like host services, right, to be able to see to be able to provide better quote times and that sort of thing, right? We've got all these reservation systems now that are linked into our host management systems. So I think through the use of effective data management and technology, we can hopefully help with that sort of demand and engineering. I think you can call it, right? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm seeing with some groups is like, how can we integrate our different elements, right? Like reservation systems and our host systems and our KDS systems, all of that, right?
Yeah, it's super important, isn't it? I mean, I always say to F&B managers, general managers, your reservation system is your best sales tool. Forget the EPOS, forget all of this. Your reservation system can make you more cash if you set it up to be able to really yield your restaurant. And a metric we've started using recently, and I posted about it on LinkedIn actually, was utilization. And it was about looking at utilization of the total available covers as percentage. And it was all born from the fact that we were working with some people and they were saying we'd had a covers increase of 50%, which sounded great in numbers. But in actual utilization, it was about 46% of the total restaurant. So our viewpoint on that was, yeah, we've doubled covers. That's great, but we've still got 54% of availability that we've got left to fill. So actually that 50% increase isn't that great. So how do we keep working and how do we keep developing the systems that we've put into place to get the 50% to increase it? And I think that's where, back to how do you use data and how can you help it enable decisions. I think it's also about not looking at certain metrics and using them to your advantage, because that's another thing that people can do, especially when it comes to kind of monthly review time and things like that, isn't it? And staying really objective with what it's telling you.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious, Scott, to know your thoughts on this. You and I have chatted with Ashwin before from Juicer, but there's Juicer's doing a fantastic job working with restaurants on dynamic pricing, and I feel like dynamic pricing, is going to be blowing up. I think it currently is within the restaurant industry, particularly for demand engineering purposes, right? It's like, hey, we've got this really incredible demand on Friday night at 8 o'clock. But then Tuesday at 3 o'clock, it's not as high. So let's try and figure out how we can engineer pricing to move demand around. What's your thoughts on that?
This is a really fascinating one, isn't it? Because I did a thing on LinkedIn the other week about dynamic pricing, and it's amazing how many people think a promotion is dynamic pricing. And I'm not sure people truly understand what it means for restaurants. Because a lot of people say, we've been using dynamic pricing with happy hour and events pricing and things like that before. But I think when we're talking about dynamic pricing, it goes much deeper, doesn't it? It's exactly what you're saying. We know if we're in the Shard in London and we can see all of London on a Saturday night, the window seat is like the prime seat. So dynamic pricing would tell you that seat should be more money. Exactly like when you go on an aeroplane and you want to sit as far forward as you can. and you have to pay more money for the seats at the front of the plane. It's the similar sort of concept, isn't it? And I think there's definitely a part to play. I saw a thing from Ashwin actually explaining dynamic pricing, which I'd never heard before, but was a really good way of putting it. Is dynamic pricing is pricing that fluctuates based on demand. So a happy hour isn't dynamic pricing because that's a promotion that's designed to generate and drive revenue. So I just thought it was a really interesting way to look at it. And I think for me, there's a part to play. Absolutely. And I think everyone's become much more used to it. We're seeing it more often. We've been doing it in hotels for years. We've been doing it on airlines for years as customers. And I think now is the time where, there's a restaurant or a bar just opened in London that's doing the same thing. And they've got the cocktail menu like the stock exchange.
Mhm.
And the more people buy it, the more the price goes up based on this concept. But the concept is around the stock exchange. And I think that's absolutely the right way to go about dynamic pricing right now, which is to try and make a concept out of it, because it is a big jump to suddenly start changing menu prices on a Saturday versus a Tuesday, especially when in a lot of restaurants we can't even update menus on the website when we change a dish,
Yeah.
let alone change pricing, right? So I think there's definitely a part to play. I think it's just got to be with the right system, exactly like you're saying with Juicer, who helps hold your hand through the way, and I think there's a part to play for sure,
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.
I guess we can't do something about talking about the future, right, without talking about AI.
Right.
And I had a conversation with Christian actually about exactly what you were saying earlier about how you can automate results and talk about it. And he was saying that they've had a bit of a dabble, but at times the results have thrown up a little wrong. If anyone's used Chat GPT, you know that can definitely happen. So is there a place where AI can come into the industry and make an impact, or is it still too early because people don't necessarily understand whether it's right or wrong?
Yeah, I think that so ChatGPT had a plugin called Code Interpreter, which is now I think moved to a new plugin that's called like Data and Analysis Services or something like that. So you can upload an Excel file and you know um, ask questions about the results. And I tried this the other day where I took just a mock data set, just a product mix report, and it just had mock values in it with no actual like names of any whatever, and basically said like based on this product mix, how would you engineer a menu? Well, that's a really difficult question to ask because ChatGPT doesn't have all the answers. Like, yes, there is I think literally a trillion parameters in ChatGPT based on all of the knowledge of the internet up to September 2021, right? But um, AI needs to be trained on data, and I don't think that there are models currently available that have been trained in a big way on restaurant data. And that's actually an area of my work that I'm focusing on right now is building training modules for AI systems so that we can um, start to integrate AI into restaurant analysis and get responses that are more relevant to our industry, right? I think that ChatGPT, the system will try its best to answer a question based on like generalized knowledge of the industry, but I think there's a lot more value that can be provided by AI if the system is trained more effectively. So I think that's what you're going to see soon is systems that are much more effective for very specific tasks, and that those systems will eventually be amalgamated into a macro system that will be trained on industry wide knowledge, food cost, labor cost, POS, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and back to your point about looking at how you can automate output from some of this data and help your teams. I guess with a lot of the workforce coming through into kind of middle management roles now, they're coming from the digital age, so to speak. They've grown up with tech. They are fluent with it. They're proficient with it. They want tech as part of what they do. So I guess getting something that can then help that output because one of the things I think right now is we're in a danger of having a system for everything in restaurants. And I love tech and I love data. So for me to say that is a big statement, right? But I think we've got to be careful we don't overwhelm people with too much data. And I think, one of the things that I found when we were using Tenzo is what I used to like was it used to help me prioritize where I needed to focus my attention. And I guess doing what you're doing now, or some of the things that you're talking about, producing a dashboard every week that goes to the operator going, your top 3 things where you can make an impact on your business this week is X, is really quite a powerful tool for someone to have in the locker every week, isn't it? Because in the age of having to look after guests, do office stuff and trying to consolidate all that data as well, it's almost virtually impossible for operators, isn't it?
It really is, and there's a lot of work to happen in that space. Like, I can do that with a client, from a consulting standpoint, right? Is that we can build a model and we can try and get to a space where there's some prescriptive analytics, to help the client, right? But to do that in an automated way is going to take quite a bit of work, and I think that's mainly due to the fact that, to your point, there's so many different systems, right? And they're so siloed. Like, it's so hard to bring data together from all these different systems. That's essentially what I've done for the last 10 plus years, is try and bring data together from various different software sources, and put it together into master data sets. And it's very, very difficult. And while I love companies like Tenzo, I love, well, I could go on, but like Margin Edge, like all of these systems are very good at what they do. 7Shifts, right? Push, like all these companies are very good at their individual tasks. You can't really beat a system like R365. And I hope that there's more systems like R365 that are developed soon, because I think that it's important to have healthy competition in that space. But it's the first RMS, or restaurant management software solution, that I've utilized that is able to provide you a sort of a holistic solution, and a meeting place for all of your data, without having to go through all like the headache of being able to try and amalgamate it together. Tenzo's doing a great work in that space, but there needs to be more competitors, I think, as well.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you say. That integration into all these systems is difficult as well, isn't it? It's which ones are people using the most at the time, and then a new guy comes on the block, and he suddenly becomes the one that people want to integrate into, and it's just, it does make it really difficult. And then where do you stop when you start looking at that and consolidation of data and into the different apps that are going on and what have you? What if you were sitting with a client now and he didn't have anything, he was still using a old school cash register, doing his inventory on pen and paper, what are the systems that you go, do you know what, these are the things that are going to pump out data that's going to have the biggest impact on your business? Is it just the classic ones of EPOS inventory labor system, or would you be starting to look at some of the other platforms right now?
I think it depends on the size of the restaurant. If you're talking about like a cafe, I think I would probably go with a system that's a little bit more geared towards that style of service, and cover count that's maybe a little bit smaller. Something like Touch Bistro works really well in that space. But I think for any like restaurant that is going to be doing $3 to $5 million a year, or maybe $2 to $5 million a year, I can't. As much as I've always had a thing where I really want to support the little guys, right? Or really want to support like the up and comers. You just cannot beat Restaurant 365, in my opinion, at this point in time,
Mm.
just because of how easy it is to get all of your data into one space, and then be able to just have it all summarized in a dashboard for you. And like they've just come out with the ultimate solution with respect to like, even a restaurant income statement, right? Being able to try and pull all this data from these various different sources into your accounting system requires like API connections and all of these like technical elements, right? Whereas Restaurants 365 is going to give you that in one space. So, I yeah, I love the Restaurant 365 product. And I find that it would be the easiest probably for a restaurant to utilize right out of the gates because it's gonna be like a one-stop shop. But I really do hope that there's gonna be more competition in that space soon.
So we've talked about the future, right? And we've talked about how we can consolidate our data into as little system as possible. If we do have multiple systems, how we can put it into a consolidation, Tenzo, Power BI, Restaurant 365. And then you've said the next step on that is that then automates the output to go, Mr. Operator, these are your XYZ of things you should focus on this week. If there's any data analysts and you're one of them listening to this show right now, they're probably looking at what they can go and do as a pivot change on a career. Like, does it worry you that automation is coming, or is it something that you can use to enable what you do and get produce better information for your clients?
You know what? It is going to sound funny, but it doesn't worry me at all. In fact, it excites me. Right? I mentioned before talking about automated reporting that would essentially replace what I do as a data analyst. But what I will say is that 80% of my job as an analyst is to actually set up your information into a system that can be analyzed. Right. So if a system comes along where that data is being kind of combined together and being spat out into a report, that's amazing. That's going to be amazing for restaurants because now they can spend $100 and get a analyst, you know, essentially a report developed by a group of analysts, that will be very valuable for them. But what it'll also do is it'll, I think, throw a enormous sort of opportunity into the restaurant industry for those of us on the data side, because restaurants will start to realize, like, okay, if I want to use this tool that will literally send me an email with all of the action items that I need for the week, I need to have my data set up correctly. And that's kind of the message that I've been, uh, you know, uh, communicating on things like LinkedIn for a lot of months now. Right? Is that if you want to utilize some of this information or some of this technology that's coming out on the market now, you need to have your information set up correctly. A good example of that, we've got a good friend of ours, Matt Wampler over at ClearCogs, and his system is so incredibly powerful when it comes to setting up your par levels and making sure that you're not wasting as much food because you're using proper technology to set your orders and your par levels. Like, that information or that technology can't be utilized unless you have your data set up correctly. And if you need to set up your data correctly but you don't have the capacity, then you need to hire somebody. And I think that's where data analysts are going to really have a lot of opportunity in the coming years. Is by helping set up these systems and getting people set up for success.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to make. And I think the clay cogs thing is a perfect example, isn't it? Of if you let people in your back system, or you don't look at what's going on with your EPOS, you're not reconciling and making sure that things are mapping properly. The power of those tools really gets lost, doesn't it? So I think it's really interesting from that perspective that I guess it's about pivoting what you do to enabling those systems to perform as strong as they are, rather than kind of looking at how you can get the output out of there. And you're almost enabling the output to be able to be generated rather than the other way around, aren't you, in that respect? So it really is a shift in terms of how people should think about what they're doing and where they might need to engage someone like you or a data analyst in the business to really help them perform. And is that where you would say right now, if you're a business, 80, 100, 200 people, 200 stores, locations in your business, you have a data analyst sitting there and he's doing what he needs to do. Would you be taking a percentage of his time away to make sure that that data is 100% clean and almost putting a KPI on that? Or would you kind of leave him to what he's doing now and ticking away at the boxes? What would you do from your perspective?
Yeah, if you're at 200 locations and you have a single data analyst. You really should have a what we call a database administrator sitting right beside them, making sure that the data governance is perfect, and things are being mapped correctly on the back end, right? And if you don't have a database administrator or some sort of IT person that's helping ensure that the data is coming in correctly, then that needs to be one of the top priorities for your data analyst. If your data analyst is providing analysis to your executive team based on data that is not being maintained or is not being cleansed on a regular basis, then it's worthless in my opinion, because you're going to have tons of errors present within the data that it's not going to help anyone, right? So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think that a data analyst should always be spending a huge amount of his or her time on ensuring that the data is cleansed, that it's being mapped correctly, validating that information. Validation, in my opinion, is almost as important as the outcome or the output of the analysis, right? And the recommendations, because if you're providing recommendations, like I said, based on unclean data, um, how valuable is that, right? So yeah, definitely, you gotta focus on it. It's very important.
For sure. And we've spoke before and on a couple of bits, and I think we did a piece once about what could people do tomorrow to start implementing data into the business. So, in case people haven't heard that, what would be the things that you would recommend to go start looking at these things tomorrow if you're not using them today, and over time you're going to start seeing a big shift in how you view what you're doing in your restaurant, cafe, bar, etc.
Yeah, I love this question because one of the biggest challenges that I see with regards to data adoption in our industry is that everybody's just so busy. Like general managers are busy enough, chefs are busy enough, all of the junior managers are busy enough. Everybody's got things to do, and to ask a general manager or chef to go into the back office system and grab a report and then aggregate it and pull out the findings, and that's just like that's an incredible amount of work when the default response is I just want to be on the floor, and I think that's totally a legitimate response, right? Because the more time on the floor, the better the experience for the guests, better the experience for the staff, right? I think the best way to start using data today is to start small and just start with just easy metrics. So one example of that is to take something like cover count. Yeah, you know what? We probably know what our cover count is on a daily basis, right? And for some restaurants, they have a whiteboard in the back that will keep track of it, or something in the office where you can keep track of your weekly cover counts or your daily cover counts. But what I would do is I would take your management team on a Monday during your next manager meeting and look around the table and say, you know, Scott, I would like you to focus on cover change. So next Monday, I want you to let us know how our cover change has changed week to week for each of our day parts, right? So on Monday, lunch versus Monday, the previous lunch, and Monday dinner versus the dinner before. And I want you to let us know about any insights that you have. Doesn't need to be game changing. If you have really nothing important, that's okay, but that's your job. And then you go to the next person. Cindy, I'd like you to take a look at, our food cost variance and tell us like what the top three items are each week that we're variant on, and some potential action items, right? And you just go around the table and you give everybody one single metric, one single easy to find metric. And then each Monday you come back and you talk about it. And then after a month, you switch it up, right? And get everybody to talk about a new metric. Then what happens is, as a general manager, as a chef, is that you're able to receive feedback about these metrics from your management team. You don't have to be actively involved in the data collection process, but everybody has their own little task, and by switching it every month, everybody's going to get familiar with where that information is located, and you're just building a culture of performance measurement, right? People are just starting small, they're starting easy, they're starting with small metrics. Nobody needs to have all of that responsibility on their shoulders at once, because if they did, they're just not going to do it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We ran a business in Dubai, and one of the ways we increased revenue was by literally putting the budget on a whiteboard in the kitchen, and through the day we had touch points. So whatever, I don't know, 8 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and we went up and put the revenue for the day on it and showed people how far away we were from budget. And we increased revenue and we started hitting budget time after time after time just by that visibility and awareness of what the sales was telling us through the day. And it's amazing, isn't it, how if you make people aware of what's going on in your business, and so many owners, I see this in owners especially, want to keep that revenue and want to keep those things as close as they can because they don't want the people to know how much money they're making or not making. And you know, sometimes that visibility of data for your people is really key because they want to know how the business is doing, right?
I couldn't agree more. Honestly, like I think your manager logbook has a lot more value than people really understand, right? You know, if you were able
Mm.
to add a couple KPIs into your manager logbook, that would include like the number of labor hours you utilized, um, you know, maybe how much labor dollars you spent. You know, just keep track of all of those items. I think that's really valuable for the team for sure.
Perfect. So we're coming to the end of the show now, and I like to ask three questions when we finish up. So I'm going to hit them to you. So the first one: what are your three main values?
Three main values. Um, Yeah, so for me, I think the biggest thing, and this is just from having worked with people in the past and you know through my own experiences, I think the biggest thing for me is to just be honest and to be real. So those are two. You know, for me, it's there's nothing worse than not having trust in the person that you're working with, and so it's really important. You know, both professionally and personally, to just be honest and be real, and not kind of fake what I can do or what my skill set is. That's very important. And then I think the last one would be, you know, to be client centric. And what I mean by that, I know that kind of sounds a little bit mushy or whatever, but when I work with a client, like I try and like dive into their business, right? If they're local, I try and eat at their restaurant. You know, I try and talk to people about their restaurants, you know, and act as if the outcome of their or the success of their restaurant is now my responsibility. It's not just about setting up their data. It's about kind of making sure that, you know, I'm supporting them in all elements and diving straight in. So being client centric as well is really important for me.
I love that. That's a really cool one. The second one: what does success mean to you?
It has changed quite a bit in my career. Like now, you know, for the past 8 months, I've been working on my own, and I'm starting to really understand what success actually looks like. You know, for me, running my own business has been an absolutely amazing experience, and it just continues to grow. And you know, I think if I'm able to do what I love, which is you know, help um, businesses primarily in the restaurant industry, you know, be more successful through data utilization. Like that's actually something that I'm really passionate about. I've always have. I've always kind of been like an Excel nerd in that way. If I can continue to do that and be curious about progressing the industry forward, right, while also spending more time with my family, to me that's success for sure.
Yeah, and do you know what? I would echo everything you just said then, because that's exactly what I felt since I started up my own business as well, is that freedom of time, even though to be fair, sometimes I work harder than I did before, but I
Yeah.
have the freedom to choose when. And the fact that you can make an impact of something that you've built on your own is definitely a really big difference in terms of measure of success. So
Mm.
I think that's a great answer. The last one. So, what advice would you give to an 18-year-old you?
Ooh, that's a good question. 18-year-old me was working as a server at a restaurant group here in Vancouver. And I don't think at the time I was in university and I was, you know, studying business and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So the restaurant industry, you know, for me at the time was just sort of this kind of thing I was a part of, but I didn't really expect to have a full blown career helping within the industry. 18-year-old me, if I could go back, I'd say learn how to build applications and learn how to build training management systems, and you know start providing that technology to restaurants. because there's so much opportunity, when I was 18 that now people are taking advantage of.
Yeah, 100%. Getting early. Getting early.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So we actually introduced me to the digital hospitality room on Clubhouse with Sean Walchef, and I have to say it's one of the best things that you probably have helped with, and you've helped me with a lot over the last few months. We always kind of end the show, don't we, by talking about what one of our key tips, takeaways, homework assignments is for the room and that session. So what would you say would be the key takeaway for any operator who's listened to this and some real good stuff that you've talked about? What would be the one key takeaway you would say that this should be the one thing you should go away and implement into your business?
I think one of the hardest parts about data utilization is I think for a lot of people in the industry, it feels like an optional thing to do, right? And it's kind of one of those, like, when you look around your house and you have potentially 5 or 6 different projects that you want to do but you just don't do, but then when you do it, you're like, oh man, that was actually way easier than I thought. I'm glad I did that. That's kind of how I view data analysis. So much like we were talking about before, with starting small and starting easy, and sort of getting your management team involved in the process. That's the takeaway I think that people should have here, is just start tomorrow. Start tomorrow, include a couple extra KPIs in your manager log, get people started to just talk about it. And you'll just find that people become genuinely interested in the numbers. And I think as you sort of grow, it'll just get easier and easier and easier. Don't start big. If you try and start big and analyze everything, you're just going to be like, man, I'm not getting any value out of this. Start small, grow it organically, and you'll be amazed at the success that you'll have by utilizing your data more effectively.
Yeah, perfect take. I think it would be great to shout out the Clubhouse room as well. So Digital Hospitality Clubhouse room, LinkedIn on a Wednesday, Clubhouse on a Friday. I think, what is it, 10 a.m. Pacific time?
Yep,
6 p.m. here in the UK, and I think around 1 o'clock in Eastern time as well, if I get my time zones right. So check it in, because there's some great people on there, and I've personally met a lot of people. So Troy Hooper, Jason Berkowitz, obviously Sean Walchef, Heather Cox. There's so many, isn't there, that add so much value every week. So anyone who's in the industry should definitely check out that room for sure. On there, Derek, thank you very much. As always, really appreciate chatting with you. Last thing, where can people find you if they want to know more about data, or they want to get you on board and help them clean up what they're doing in terms of the data output?
I think the best spot is LinkedIn. I'm highly active on LinkedIn, and I'm posting every day on there. I've got a newsletter called Tech to Table. You should definitely check out, with a lot of the stuff that we were just chatting about today. So yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn. My business, like I said, is Canopy Metrics. So we have a page on LinkedIn as well. And then, yeah, just look for Derek Smith, and should see me on there. I think my little tag underneath is the performance management or measurement expert. So it might help find me a little easier.
Or as I like to say, making data cool, right?
Making data cool.
Well, so
trying.
that's how you do it.
Yeah.
Derek, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And people should definitely read Tech to Toast, because it really is a great newsletter. And I'm subscribed, and I've got the bell firmly rang on LinkedIn as well to see the posts, because they're really valuable for anyone. So thank you very much, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Scott. You take care.
You've been listening to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation one huddle at a time. Hospitality Huddles is brought to you in partnership with Auden Hospitality. Visit the website at www.audenhospitality.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.